Your mother gave me a life I never asked for. I simply returned this cursed gift. The echoing silence of the university chapel pressed down on Marcus Hayes's shoulders with the weight of an architectural structure that had failed the test of time. The high Gothic vaults swallowed every sound, the rustle of programs, muffled coughs, the creak of wooden pews beneath hundreds of mourners. Light through stained glass windows fell in slanted beams, painting faces in cold shades of blue and purple. The air smelled of incense, wood polish, and wilting lilies, scents Marcus would forever associate with the end of his former world. He stood behind the dark oak podium, fingers resting on the polished surface, the only anchor in a room that slowly spun around him. Before him stretched a sea of faces, university professors in tweed jackets, his mother's former students, neighbors, librarians, strangers whose lives she had once touched with her quiet kindness. In the front row sat Rebecca, his sister, impeccably dressed even in grief, flanked by her 2 children. Her husband held her hand. Marcus stood alone. He cleared his throat. The sound echoed off stone walls. "My mother," he began, his voice steadier than expected, "was the quiet heart of this town." The phrase was rehearsed. He'd spent 3 days writing this speech, constructing each sentence with the precision of an architectural blueprint. Emotions were material to be controlled, organized, channeled in the right direction. He couldn't allow himself to break here, in front of these people. Catherine Hayes never sought recognition. She never gave grand speeches. Her work happened in the muted light of the library reading room, in quiet conversations with struggling students, in notes left in book margins for those who would come after. Marcus paused, his gray eyes sliding across the rows. She believed every story deserved a good ending, and she dedicated her life to helping people find theirs. Several people nodded. Somewhere in the back, a woman pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. Marcus continued, moving toward the climax of his speech. That story the entire town had heard dozens of times, the one that had transformed Catherine Hayes from a good person into a symbol. Many of you remember October 2016, the night on the dormitory roof when my mother saved Nathan Cole's life. His voice wavered slightly on that name, but he forced himself to continue. A young man stood on the edge of the abyss, literally and metaphorically. She didn't call the police, didn't cry for help. She simply approached him and talked. 3 hours. In the cold, in the rain. She didn't step back until he stepped away from the edge. Marcus looked at the casket standing before the altar. Closed. Polished mahogany reflecting candlelight. She built bridges where others saw only chasms. His voice strengthened. And that bridge is her legacy. A bridge between despair and hope. Between darkness and light. Between loss and... He didn't finish. Couldn't. Grief rose in his throat like a wave, threatening to overwhelm him. He gripped the podium edges tighter, feeling wood dig into his palms. Deep breath in, out. Control. Her light will remain with us. He stepped back from the podium. Thank you. There was no applause, this was a funeral, but the silence that followed was full of agreement. Marcus slowly descended from the platform, each step requiring effort. The priest placed a hand on his shoulder, whispered something comforting. Marcus nodded, not hearing the words. The memorial reception took place in the university library's large conference hall, the place where Catherine had spent 35 years of her life. Tables were covered with white cloths, laden with trays of sandwiches no one ate, and pitchers of lemonade slowly going flat. People gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed voices, sharing memories. Marcus stood by a tall arched window, holding a cup of cold tea. Outside, autumn rain streamed down the glass, blurring the outlines of old oaks in the park. He'd detached from the hum of sympathetic voices, letting them become white noise. The memory came without warning, with frightening clarity. 3 years ago, his loft, the night the Civic Center reconstruction project failed at the final presentation. Marcus sat at his drafting table, surrounded by mountains of crumpled paper, physical manifestation of his inadequacy. Each wad was a rejected idea, proof that his approach was wrong, his vision insufficient. The smell of coffee mixed with the smell of despair. Catherine had appeared without knocking. She was the only person he'd given a key. She didn't hug him, didn't offer trite comforts, simply walked to the table, looked at the last blueprint he was trying to salvage. Her finger slowly traced one of the access lines. "Every great building begins with one honest line, Marcus." Her voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "Find yours. The rest will follow." That phrase became his foundation, not just a professional principle, but a moral compass. Honesty, structural integrity, refusing to compromise truth for convenience. Catherine had taught him that. She was the embodiment of Mr. Hayes. A voice tore through the memory. Marcus spun sharply. Through the crowd of mourners moved a figure that violated all funeral harmony. A man of about 55 in a rumpled brown suit, tie loosened, top button undone. His broad, puffy face expressed not grief, but professional weariness. Pale blue eyes looked at Marcus with the detachment of someone for whom others' tragedy is daily routine. Detective Tom Sullivan. "Spare me a minute." It wasn't a request. Sullivan placed a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture that looked comforting but felt like a grip. He steered him toward the exit, away from the crowd. They stopped in a narrow corridor between bookshelves, the smell of old bindings mixed with the scent of floor polish. Fluorescent lights cast harsh, unnatural illumination. Sullivan released his shoulder, pulled out a small, worn notebook. "We've completed the initial interrogation of Nathan Cole." The detective's voice was low, monotonous. He didn't look Marcus in the eyes, his gaze directed somewhere over his shoulder. "He's fully competent. Psychiatric evaluation confirmed it. Shows no remorse." Marcus remained silent, his fingers tightened around the teacup. Sullivan flipped a page in his notebook, found the right entry. He provided an explanation for his actions. I'll quote verbatim. The detective cleared his throat and began reading with the same dispassion with which he might read a list of evidence. "I want you to understand. Catherine Hayes didn't save me. She sentenced me to 10 years of suffering. 10 years of existence I didn't choose. I didn't murder her. I was terminating our contract." Each word fell on Marcus with the weight of an iron beam. The world narrowed to this corridor, to the detective's monotone voice, to the absurd, monstrous words. Contract? Marcus heard his own voice, as if from far away. What is he talking about? Sullivan shrugged, a minimal gesture expressing complete indifference to philosophical nuances. He claims that 10 years ago, your mother convinced him not to jump from the dormitory roof, made some kind of pact with him. He believes she forced upon him a life he didn't want to live. The detective closed his notebook. That's his version of motive. Version. The word hung in the air, offensive in its neutrality. Rage exploded in Marcus's chest with such force that for a moment he couldn't breathe. His voice, when he spoke, came out sharp, echoing off the shelves. This is insane. This man is a psychopath. He murdered my mother, and now he's trying to justify it with philosophical madness. Sullivan didn't react. His face remained a mask of professional weariness. "I understand your feelings, Mr. Hayes." "No." Marcus stepped closer, nearly advancing on the detective. "You don't understand. You're repeating his words as if they mean something. My mother saved his life. She's a hero. And you're giving a platform to—" "Mr. Hayes." Sullivan's voice became slightly harder. "I'm not giving anyone a platform. I'm providing you with information that the victim's family has a right to receive. The suspect's motive is part of the case." "But this isn't motive. This is slander." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. The teacup fell to the floor, shattering. He didn't notice. "You should protect her name, not let this monster—" "I protect the law." Sullivan tucked the notebook into his inner pocket. "Nathan Cole will be tried for first-degree murder. Maximum sentence, life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The prosecutor is confident of a conviction. That's the only protection I can offer." The words sounded final. Conversation over. Sullivan turned to leave. "I want to see him." Marcus's voice came out hollow. The detective stopped, turned back. "What?" "Nathan Cole. I want to meet with him. Talk." Sullivan slowly shook his head. "Impossible. He's in custody awaiting trial. Only his attorney has access. That's protocol." Protocol. Another word turning tragedy into administrative procedure. "To hell with protocol!" Marcus was nearly shouting. "This is my mother. He killed my mother. I have the right." "You have no rights in this matter, Mr. Hayes." Sullivan's voice turned cold. "Go home. Mourn your mother. Let the justice system do its work." He left, his heavy footsteps fading somewhere deep in the library. Marcus stood alone in the corridor, surrounded by shards of porcelain and spilled tea. Rage pulsed in his temples. His mission crystallized with absolute clarity. He had to protect his mother's legacy, had to ensure the whole world saw Nathan Cole for what he was, a deranged killer trying to desecrate the memory of a saint. The system wouldn't help him? He'd find another way. Marcus didn't say goodbye to Rebecca or the guests. He walked out of the library into the cold autumn rain, got in his car, and drove to the Riverside Police Precinct. The drive took 20 minutes. Wipers scraped monotonously across the windshield. Familiar streets of his hometown slid past, blurred by rain, seeming foreign and hostile. Marcus gripped the wheel tight, his jaw clenched. He had to see Nathan Cole. Look into the eyes of the man who'd spoken those words. See madness there. Emptiness. Anything that would confirm the obvious. The precinct sat on the edge of town, in a squat brick building constructed in the 70s. Marcus parked, ran inside, soaked and trembling from cold and fury. Inside smelled of cheap coffee and floor cleaner. Fluorescent lights cast deathly illumination on peeling beige walls. Behind a high counter of bulletproof glass sat an elderly desk sergeant, hunched over a newspaper crossword. Marcus approached the window, knocked on the glass. The sergeant slowly raised his eyes, assessed the soaked, disheveled man before him. "What can I do for you?" "I need to see Nathan Cole." The words came out sharp. "Immediately." The sergeant set down his pen. "Name?" "Marcus Hayes. I'm the victim's son, Catherine Hayes." The sergeant's expression didn't change. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Hayes, but I can't arrange such a meeting. The suspect is in custody. Only his attorney has access. Those are the rules." "To hell with the rules!" Marcus's voice broke into a shout. Several officers at the far end of the room turned. "This man killed my mother. I have the right to look him in the eyes." "Sir, calm down." "No! You don't understand. He's saying monstrous things about her. I have to—" Marcus saw the door behind the sergeant. A sign, "Interrogation Rooms." Somewhere there, behind that door, sat Nathan Cole. So close. In a surge of desperation and fury, Marcus lunged for the side door leading into the precinct. He managed to yank the handle, locked, before a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. Detective Sullivan materialized from somewhere in the corridor. Another officer appeared beside him, young, fit. Together they gently but firmly pulled Marcus from the door, turned him toward the exit. "Mr. Hayes, don't make trouble." Sullivan's voice was level, devoid of anger or sympathy. "Not for yourself, not for us." Marcus tried to break free. The young officer tightened his grip. They pushed him back into the lobby, toward the entrance doors. Cold air from outside slapped his face. "Go home," Sullivan released him. "Mourn your mother. Let us do our work." The door closed in Marcus's face with a dull click of the lock. He stood in the rain on the concrete precinct steps, soaked, trembling, humiliated. Complete, absolute powerlessness flooded through him. The system had rejected him, denied him the right to confrontation, the right to defend his mother's honor. He slowly returned to his car, sat behind the wheel. His reflection in the rearview mirror stared back with empty eyes. The loft met him with echoing silence. Marcus closed the massive metal door behind him, leaned back against it. Water dripped from his coat, forming a puddle on the polished concrete floor. He looked around. High ceilings, arched windows through which the Brooklyn Bridge was visible, shrouded in rain haze. Drafting table of oak and steel. Le Corbusier chair. Bookshelves where volumes were arranged by color. Fiddle-leaf fig in the corner. Perfect order, impeccable geometry. Temple of control and rationality. But now all this sterile beauty seemed to Marcus a fragile set, a false facade concealing emptiness. He removed his wet coat, threw it on a chair, walked to the bar along the far wall, pulled out a bottle of single malt whiskey, poured a generous portion into a heavy crystal glass, drank it in one gulp. The alcohol burned his throat, but brought no relief. Nathan Cole's words echoed in the loft's silence. "She sentenced me to 10 years of suffering. I was terminating our contract." Madness. Obvious, pathological madness. But why had the detective quoted it so calmly? Why did the system accept these words as legitimate motive? Marcus poured more whiskey. His hand trembled slightly. He'd lost the first battle. Couldn't break through the bureaucratic wall. Was left alone with his grief, anger, and the killer's monstrous words. A loud, sharp buzz from the intercom shattered the silence. Marcus flinched, nearly dropping the glass. He looked at the clock. 9 in the evening. Who could it be at this hour? He approached the panel by the door, pressed the button. On the small black and white screen appeared a blurred figure in a courier service uniform. "Urgent delivery for Mr. Marcus Hayes." Marcus frowned, but pressed the button to unlock the door downstairs. A few minutes later came a knock. He opened. A young courier handed him a tablet for signature and a thick cream-colored envelope. The paper felt expensive. In the upper left corner, an embossed logo, Morrison, Hale and Associates, the law firm defending Nathan Cole. Marcus signed, closed the door, stood staring at the envelope in his hands. Heavy foreboding tightened his chest. He opened the envelope, pulled out a single sheet of paper. This wasn't an official legal notice. This was a personal message, written in small, obsessively neat handwriting. Mr. Hayes, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for understanding. The truth about what happened on the roof the night of October 14, 2016, isn't in newspaper articles, not in the heroic myths this town created. It's in your mother's purple moleskin journal, in the drawer of her mahogany desk. Under the false bottom, the mechanism opens with a pin on the left side. Read the entry from October 14, 2016. After that, we'll both be free. N.C. Marcus reread the letter. Once, twice, 3 times. Every detail was frighteningly specific. Purple journal, moleskin, mahogany desk, false bottom, pin on the left side. Either this was a carefully constructed lie, or Nathan Cole had actually been in his mother's apartment, had seen her desk, knew about the hiding place. We'll both be free. Cold crept up Marcus's spine. He walked to the window, looked out at rain-soaked Riverside. Somewhere out there, in the apartment above the bookstore downtown, stood his mother's desk. And in it, perhaps, lay either proof of the killer's monstrous lie or... Marcus didn't allow himself to finish the thought. He had to check. Had to find that journal and see blank pages inside. Or weather notes. Or book order lists. Anything except confirmation of Nathan Cole's words. His grief receded, giving way to a new, grim determination. Rage transformed into something colder and more dangerous, the need to know the truth, whatever it might be. Marcus folded the letter, slipped it into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, dialed. Rebecca? This is Marcus. Do you have a key to Mom's apartment? Pause on the other end. Yes, of course. Why? I need to pick something up. Tomorrow morning. Can you give it to me? Another pause. Longer. Marcus, are you okay? He looked at his reflection in the dark window glass, soaked, disheveled, with feverish brightness in his eyes. Yes, he lied. I just want to get some documents for the funeral home. All right. Come by tomorrow at 9, before court. Marcus hung up. Before court. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. He looked at the letter in his hand again. We'll both be free. Marcus didn't believe in freedom through truth. He believed in truth as the foundation upon which order is built. But for the first time in his life, he began to fear what he might discover when he started digging. Sleep wouldn't come. Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his loft, where moonlight through arched windows drew geometric patterns on concrete. Usually these sharp lines calmed him. Order, control, predictability. Now they seemed like prison bars. Second night. Second night without sleep. Words from Nathan Cole's letter pulsed in his consciousness with the obsessive monotony of a metronome. Purple moleskin journal, mahogany desk, false bottom, pin on the left side. Every detail was frighteningly specific, professionally precise, like specifications in an architectural project. Either this was a carefully constructed lie, or his mother's killer had actually been in her apartment, had seen her desk, knew about the hiding place. Marcus sat up sharply, ran his palms over his face. Skin was hot, rough with unshaven stubble. The clock on the nightstand showed 3:47. He got up, walked to the drafting table. Work. Work always helped organize the chaos of thoughts. He turned on the desk lamp, unrolled the blueprint for the old train station reconstruction project, an assignment he'd been struggling with for the past 3 weeks, grabbed his rotring mechanical pencil, tried to focus on the lines, but his hand wouldn't obey. Straight lines curved, parallels converged, angles lost precision. After 10 minutes, the sheet was ruined. Marcus threw the pencil on the table. The sound of metal on wood echoed in the loft's silence. He walked to the window. Riverside spread below, a scattering of lights, empty streets, rare cars. Somewhere out there, downtown, in the apartment above the bookstore, stood his mother's desk, and in it, perhaps, lay either confirmation of monstrous lies or proof of her innocence. Every hour of inaction felt like betrayal. Marcus turned to the steel shelving unit against the wall. On the second shelf, in a simple silver frame, stood the only family photograph. He took it, brought it to the lamp's light. Catherine Hayes smiled from the photograph, standing against the backdrop of university library bookshelves. The shot was taken several years ago, celebrating her 30th year of service. Her silver hair was gathered in a loose bun, honey-colored eyes radiated warmth, hands rested on a stack of books. Marcus had looked at this photograph dozens, hundreds of times, always saw the same thing: unconditional kindness, calm wisdom, maternal love. Now, under the cold light of the desk lamp at 3 a.m, he examined it like a detective studying evidence, and suddenly noticed what he'd never seen before. Barely perceptible tension in the corners of her lips, microscopic asymmetry of her smile, deep, long-standing weariness in her eyes that even the camera's bright flash couldn't hide. Left hand slightly clenched in a fist, a gesture that Marcus, architect of gestures and lines, instantly recognized as controlled tension. This wasn't a photograph of a happy woman. This was a photograph of a woman playing the role of happy. The image of his mother split in two. St. Catherine, icon of the town, embodiment of goodness, woman without shadow. And a stranger, complex, capable of secrets, possibly of lies. Marcus set the frame on the table. His hands trembled. The sharp ring of the phone shattered the silence. He glanced at the screen. Rebecca, at 4 a.m. Marcus answered. Marcus. His sister's voice was cold as ice. No greeting, no warmth. Susan called me. Her husband works at the precinct. She said you caused a scene there yesterday. He remained silent. You tried to force your way to the killer? Rebecca's voice rose, acquiring a hysterical note. How could you? How could you sink so low? I wanted to look him in the eyes. Marcus heard weariness in his own voice. Wanted to see. See what? Proof of his insanity? Rebecca didn't let him finish. Marcus, he's manipulating you. Don't you see? He wants to destroy her memory, justify himself, and you're letting him do it. He sent me a letter. Pause. Short. Tense. What? Nathan Cole sent me a letter, through his attorney. He wrote... Marcus stopped, choosing words. He claims there's proof in Mom's apartment, in her journal. Rebecca exhaled. The sound was sharp, full of contempt. And you believe him? I didn't say, you're betraying her, Marcus. His sister's voice broke into a shout. You're betraying your own mother's memory for the words of a psychopath. She was a saint. She saved dozens of lives, and you're digging through dirt, searching for non-existent secrets. Rebecca, please, listen. No, I won't listen. You've always been like this, cold, analytical, incapable of simply accepting good when it exists. Mom loved you unconditionally, and now you're destroying everything she built. Click. Dial tone. Marcus slowly lowered the phone. Isolation. He was alone. Morning met him with gray, penetrating rain. Marcus sat in his car across from his mother's building, watching the familiar red brick structure. Victorian-era construction, 4 stories, with wrought iron balconies and arched windows. Below, Page and Spine Bookstore, its sign swaying in the wind. Catherine's apartment was on the 2nd floor. Windows dark, curtains drawn. Marcus got out of the car, raised his coat collar against the rain, walked through the courtyard, pushed the heavy entrance door, and froze. Across the oak door of his mother's apartment stretched a wide yellow tape. Plastic, cheap, but absolutely impenetrable in its officiality. Black letters screamed, "Crime scene, do not cross." Crime scene, do not cross. Marcus stared at the tape. This house had been his second home since childhood. The door he'd opened thousands of times. The apartment smelling of vanilla and old books, where he was always greeted with hugs and warm tea. Now, sealed evidence, forbidden territory, foreign space. Rage exploded in Marcus's chest, sharp and burning. "Mr. Hayes?" He turned. From the small superintendent's room emerged Harold Chen, an elderly man in a formal blue shirt buttoned to the top. Gray hair carefully combed to the side, reading glasses hanging on a chain around his neck. Marcus remembered him from childhood. Quiet, polite man who always said hello and received a box of Catherine's homemade cookies every Christmas. "Harold." Marcus stepped toward him. "I need to get into my mother's apartment." The superintendent slowly pulled glasses from his pocket, put them on, looked at Marcus over the frames. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. The apartment is sealed by police." "I understand. But I'm her son. I need to get some documents. Personal items. It'll take 5 minutes." Harold shook his head. Slowly, methodically, like a metronome. "Rules are rules, Mr. Hayes." His voice was level, devoid of emotion. "Police left clear instructions. No one can enter. No exceptions." Marcus felt his jaw clench from tension. "Harold, this is my mother. She was murdered. I have the right." "You have no right to break a police seal." The superintendent straightened behind his desk. "I'm very sorry for your loss. Mrs. Hayes was a wonderful woman. She always greeted me, always was kind." "That's exactly why." Marcus stepped closer, trying to find even a drop of sympathy in the watery blue eyes of the old man. "That's exactly why I need to get in there. To protect her memory. You understand?" Harold remained silent. His face stayed impenetrable. 5 minutes, Harold. I won't touch anything that might be evidence. Just rules are rules. The superintendent repeated the phrase with the same melancholic fatalism. If you need access, contact the police department. Fill out a request. Get permission. He returned to his room. The door closed with a soft click. Marcus stood in the empty hallway, staring at the yellow tape. This man he'd always considered a harmless old man had become an insurmountable obstacle, a living symbol of a system that places order above truth, protocol above justice. Marcus slowly descended, walked outside. The rain intensified. The Percolate Cafe sat directly across from his mother's building. Marcus sat by the window, holding a cold cup of coffee, watching the familiar structure. The clock showed 6 in the evening, Gray twilight thickened over the city. Harold Chen emerged from the entrance, locked the door, slowly shuffled toward the bus stop. The night shift superintendent came on at 10. 4 hours. Marcus ordered more coffee. Waited. Watched as rare pedestrians hurried under umbrellas as lights in windows went dark. The decision didn't come immediately. It formed gradually, layer by layer, like an architectural project built from foundation to roof. He, Marcus Hayes, architect, man of law and order, was about to commit a crime. Breaking and entering. Violation of a police seal. Every moral principle he'd lived by for 35 years screamed against this. But something screamed louder. The need to know the truth. At any cost. He paid, left the cafe. The rain had turned to downpour. Perfect. Marcus circled the building, entered from the back. The familiar gate in the courtyard, through which he'd cut through as a child, yielded easily. Service staircase, narrow, steep, smelling of dampness and old paint. Every step upward felt like a violation not just of law, but of himself. Marcus felt simultaneously like a criminal and a frightened child, sneaking somewhere he didn't belong. Second floor, his mother's apartment door. The yellow tape hung untouched. Marcus pulled from his pocket a folding knife, tool he always carried for work. His hands trembled as he inserted the blade into the lock's gap. The mechanism was old, simple. After several agonizing minutes, click, loud, final, unforgivable. Marcus froze, listening. Silence. Only the sound of rain on the roof. He carefully tore the tape, pushed the door. The apartment met him with darkness and the familiar scent of vanilla mixed with something new. Stale air, dust, faint aroma of police fingerprint powder. Marcus turned on his phone's flashlight. The narrow beam picked out familiar objects from the darkness. Armchair by the window, covered with a plaid throw. Stacks of books on the floor. Photographs on walls. Himself, small, with his father. Rebecca in school uniform. The whole family against an ocean backdrop. In the silence and darkness, these things looked like ghosts. Museum exhibits from a life that had ended. Marcus felt like a vandal desecrating a mausoleum. He walked to the writing desk. The massive mahogany desk stood against the far wall beneath the window. The surface was crowded. Stacks of letters, a porcelain cup full of pens, a framed photograph. Marcus and Rebecca, children, smiling at the camera. He crouched before the desk, directed light at the drawers. Top, open, empty. Middle, same. Bottom. Marcus pulled the brass handle. Locked. His heart beat faster. He tried to pick the lock with the knife, but the blade slipped, leaving a deep scratch on the polished surface. The scratch seemed to him a wound inflicted on his mother's memory. Anger and despair mixed into a toxic cocktail. Marcus looked around. On the shelf above the desk stood a bronze owl paperweight, gift from his mother's grandfather, family heirloom. Heavy, cast, with intricately detailed feathers. He took it. Cold metal settled in his palm with the weight of a verdict. Momentary hesitation. Strike. The crack of splintering wood sounded like blasphemy in the apartment's silence. The lock shattered. The drawer opened. Marcus lowered the paperweight. His breathing was rapid, uneven. Inside the drawer, on top, lay a stack of letters tied with faded silk ribbon. He untied it with trembling fingers, unfolded the first letter. Dear Mrs. Hayes, I'm writing to thank you. Last semester, when I was on the verge of dropping out, you spent hours helping me find sources for my thesis. You believed in me when I stopped believing in myself. Because of you, I didn't quit. You saved my life. With deepest gratitude, Thomas Eliot. Second letter. Third. Fifth. 10th. All the same. Hymns to the sainthood of Catherine Hayes. Testimonies of her kindness, patience, self-sacrifice. Relief washed over Marcus in a wave, almost physically tangible. He leaned back on his heels, pressed the letters to his chest. Nathan Cole was a liar, skilled manipulator. These letters were proof. His mother was exactly as he remembered her. Saint, hero, light. And he, Marcus, had broken down the door, smashed the lock, desecrated her memory, for nothing. Shame burned his throat, sharp and bitter. He began folding the letters back into the drawer, and his hand felt something hard beneath them. Marcus froze, slowly moved the letters aside. At the bottom of the drawer lay an elegant notebook with hard cover. Purple, moleskin, exactly as Nathan Cole had described. Time stopped. Marcus lifted the journal. The leather on the cover was smooth, pleasant to touch. On the inside, inscription in gold letters. Catherine E. Hayes. Personal. The killer couldn't have known this by chance. Couldn't have guessed the color, brand, exact location. Between Nathan Cole and Catherine Hayes, there had been some connection. Secret. Hidden from everyone. Marcus opened the journal, flipped through pages, found the date. October 14th, 2016. His mother's handwriting, beautiful, rounded, calligraphic. He began to read. Tonight, I saved a life. A young man, Nathan Cole, philosophy major, stood on the edge of the dormitory roof. I saw him by chance, returning home late in the evening. I went up to him. We talked for 3 hours. In the rain, in the cold. I tried to reach him, but he was empty, cold. Spoke about the meaninglessness of existence with frightening logic. My usual words, about hope, about the future, about the value of life, slid off him like water off glass. Marcus read, and tension slowly eased. This was the official version, the story the entire town had heard hundreds of times. Nathan had simply seen this journal, somehow gained access to the apartment. This was part of his game. Manipulation. He was about to close the journal and saw that at the bottom of the page, the handwriting changed sharply. Beautiful, rounded letters transformed into jagged, small characters, pressed into the paper with enormous force. This wasn't handwriting. These were wounds left by pen on paper. Marcus continued reading. Nothing worked. My words were empty to him. I saw in his eyes the absolute calm of someone who'd made a decision. And then I remembered Thomas, my brother. I remembered standing at his closed casket, knowing the last words he heard from me were, "Pull yourself together. Enough of this adolescent selfishness." I couldn't let it happen again. Couldn't. I told Nathan something I'd never told anyone. I told him about Thomas, about his suicide, about my guilt, about how I wake up every morning with this guilt, how it devours me from inside. And I told him that if he jumped, he wouldn't kill only himself. He would kill me too. That his death would weigh on my conscience as Thomas's death weighs, that I wouldn't survive it a second time, that we were now connected, that we had a pact. He had to live, because without that, I would die. This was emotional blackmail, manipulation. I transferred the weight of my guilt onto his shoulders, forced him to carry my burden. But it worked. He stepped back from the edge. I saved his life. Or did I sentence him to a life he didn't want to live? God will forgive me. He must forgive, because I don't know how to forgive myself. Marcus reread the last lines. Once, twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. The proof he'd sought to refute the killer's words turned out to be their complete and monstrous confirmation. The purple journal fell from his hands, hit the floor. In the apartment's silence, Marcus Hayes heard the sound of the foundation upon which his entire life was built, crumbling. Dawn found Marcus sitting at his drafting table. He didn't remember how he got from his mother's apartment to the loft. The purple journal lay before him like a radioactive artifact, dangerous, toxic, impossible to ignore. Gray light seeped through arched windows, painting concrete walls in shades of ash. Marcus reread the entry again and again, trying to find a loophole, alternative interpretation, anything that might soften the blow. This was emotional blackmail, manipulation. I transferred the weight of my guilt onto his shoulders, forced him to carry my burden. The words remained unyielding, merciless in their honesty. His mother, Saint Catherine, icon of the town, woman who taught him to build life on the solid foundation of truth, was a manipulator. She'd used someone else's despair to redeem her own guilt. She saved Nathan Cole, not for him, but for herself. Shock slowly crystallized into cold, analytical panic. Marcus couldn't live with this knowledge, couldn't accept it. Every cell of his rational mind demanded he find a way to rebuild these ruins into something acceptable. He stood, paced the loft. His reflection in the dark window glass looked back with stranger's eyes. Gaunt face, 3-day stubble, sunken eyes. An architect who'd built his life on principles of honesty and structural integrity stood on a foundation of lies. But architects don't surrender to destruction. They rebuild. By 8 in the morning, Marcus had formed a new theory. He couldn't change the facts. The words in the journal were indisputable. But he could change their context, their meaning. Nathan Cole wasn't the victim of Catherine's manipulation. He was its architect. Marcus sat at his drafting table, took a clean sheet, began constructing logic the way he constructed architectural projects. Nathan Cole, intelligent, cold psychopath. He sensed Catherine's vulnerability, her old trauma connected to her brother. The conversation on the roof wasn't rescue, but a trap. Nathan made her feel responsible for his life, turning her into a hostage of her own conscience. For 10 years he held her on this hook. For 10 years he fed on her guilt, manipulated her, and when he decided the game was over, he killed. In this version, Catherine became a victim again. Even more tragic, victim not just of a murderer, but of a long-term psychological predator. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Relief flooded through him in a warm wave, the first in several days. This story worked. It explained the journal without destroying his mother's image. It transformed evidence of her weakness into proof of Nathan's monstrosity. Marcus took the journal, walked to the scanner, made high-quality copies of the page with the entry about the pact. He put the original in a leather briefcase. Later, he'd hide it in a safe deposit box. He laminated the copies. Evidence, weapons, He had a story the system would want to hear, a version that made Nathan Cole even more monstrous than the prosecution supposed. Marcus pulled out his phone, dialed the district attorney's office. Office of Assistant District Attorney Lawrence. Marcus Hayes, Catherine Hayes's son. I need to meet with Mr. Lawrence. I have important information regarding the Nathan Cole case. Pause. Sound of typing. Mr. Lawrence, can see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Thank you. Marcus hung up. Control was returning to him, layer by layer, like a reconstructed building. The Riverside County Courthouse towered over the main square, a monolith of gray stone and time-darkened marble. Marcus climbed the wide steps, pushed the heavy door. Inside, the air smelled of century-old dust and floor polish. Footsteps echoed off high ceilings. Marcus walked past portraits of judges from years past whose eyes looked down with cold judgment. Daniel Lawrence's office was on the top floor, behind a glass wall with panoramic views of the city. Marcus entered. The secretary, a young woman in a severe suit, nodded to him. Mr. Hayes, go right in. Mr. Lawrence is expecting you. The office was the quintessence of power and coldness. Massive desk of glass and chrome, leather chair, minimalist bookshelves. Not a single personal detail, no photographs, souvenirs, traces of human life. Behind the desk sat Daniel Lawrence, an imposing man of about 48, with broad shoulders and straight posture. Dark hair with heavy gray at the temples, cold gray eyes, square jaw. Perfectly tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, conservative tie. He didn't stand. Nodded at the chair opposite. Mr. Hayes, have a seat. Marcus sat. The chair was designer, beautiful but incredibly uncomfortable. He placed his briefcase on his lap. Lawrence looked at him with polite but absolutely impenetrable expression. Assessing. Cold. My condolences. The prosecutor's voice was low, deep, perfectly modulated. Your mother was an exceptional woman. Thank you. You mentioned important information. Marcus nodded. He'd rehearsed this presentation all night. I found evidence that changes our understanding of Nathan Cole's motive, evidence that demonstrates the scale of his psychopathy. Lawrence tilted his head slightly, a gesture of interest but without enthusiasm. Continue. Marcus opened his briefcase, pulled out the laminated copies, placed them on the glass surface of the desk. This is a page from my mother's personal journal. Entry from October 14th, 2016. The night on the roof when she saved Nathan Cole. Lawrence took the copy, studied it. His face remained impenetrable. Marcus continued, words flowing. Look at this entry. My mother writes about her brother, about his suicide, about the guilt that haunted her entire life. She was broken by this trauma, vulnerable. He leaned forward, his voice becoming more tense. And Nathan Cole took advantage of that. He wasn't the victim of her manipulation. He was its architect. He sensed her weakness and turned it into a weapon against her. He kept my mother on a hook for 10 years, using her guilt, her fear of another loss. Marcus pointed at the text. She wrote this in a state of terror. She thought she saved him, but actually, he trapped her. This isn't a pact between equals. This is long-term psychological manipulation of a predator over prey. He leaned back in the chair, looking Lawrence in the eyes. This journal isn't a mitigating circumstance for Nathan Cole. It's proof that he's even more monstrous than we thought. He didn't just murder my mother. He slowly destroyed her for 10 years. Silence. Lawrence slowly removed his glasses, pulled from his pocket a perfectly clean white handkerchief, began wiping the lenses. Methodically, unhurried. Marcus waited. His heart beat with uneven rhythm. Finally, Lawrence put his glasses back on, looked at Marcus. Interesting theory, Mr. Hayes. Pause. But we don't need it. The words fell on Marcus with the weight of iron beams. What? Lawrence pushed the copies aside. His voice remained level, almost bored. This story is complicated. It requires intellectual analysis from the jury. It raises questions about moral responsibility, about shades of gray between rescue and manipulation. He folded his hands on the desk. Worse yet, it evokes sympathy for the defendant, a man who carried a burden imposed on him for 10 years. The defense could use this journal to portray Nathan Cole as a victim of emotional blackmail. Marcus opened his mouth, but Lawrence raised his hand. We don't need a complicated story, Mr. Hayes. We need a simple one. Saintly librarian and ruthless monster. Good and evil. Hero and villain. Juries understand such stories. They believe in them. He stood, walked to the panoramic window, looked at the city below. The journal is an unnecessary complication. It calls your mother's motives into question, and we can't allow the defense to even hint at her imperfection. Lawrence turned to Marcus. The prosecution is built on the victim's flawlessness and the killer's absolute guilt. Your journal destroys that construction. Therefore, we won't use it. But this is the truth. Marcus's voice broke. This is evidence. Truth, Lawrence said with a slight smile, is a luxury we can't afford in the courtroom. The courtroom doesn't seek truth, Mr. Hayes. It chooses the story that's easier to believe. He returned to the desk, sat. My job is to tell the better story, and your journal doesn't fit into it. Pause. Don't interfere. We'll do our job. Nathan Cole will get life imprisonment. Your mother will be immortalized as a hero. Everyone will be satisfied. Lawrence nodded toward the door. Thank you for coming. Have a good day. Audience over. Marcus slowly stood, took the copies from the table, left the office. In the corridor, he stopped, leaned against the cold marble wall. The system had rejected him. Not because he was wrong, because the truth was inconvenient. The drive to Willow Creek took 20 minutes. Marcus drove on autopilot, his thoughts far away. He had one hope left. The last. Rebecca. He had to show her the journal, had to make her understand the scale of what they were facing. If not the system, then at least family should stand by his side. Marcus turned into the suburban development. Perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, absence of random pedestrians. A world of controlled, glossy safety. Rebecca's house, 2-story white brick building with dark shutters, looked like a page from an upscale real estate catalog. Marcus parked, walked up the path to the porch, pressed the doorbell. The door opened almost instantly. Rebecca stood in the doorway in an impeccable cashmere sweater and perfectly fitted jeans. Light chestnut hair styled in soft waves, subtle makeup, strained smile. Marcus, voice cold. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you. It's important. She didn't step back from the door. If this is about your crazy theory regarding Mom, Rebecca, please. 5 minutes. She hesitated, looked over her shoulder, children playing in the far room, sighed. Fine. 5 minutes. She led him into the living room, space flooded with bright light from panoramic windows. White sofa with gray pillows, glass coffee table, huge family portraits on walls, artificial scent of fresh cotton from a plug-in. Rebecca sat on the edge of the sofa, arms crossed over chest. Physical barrier. Speak. Marcus pulled the journal's original from his briefcase. He'd brought it specifically. Copies might seem like forgeries. I found this in Mom's apartment, in her desk. Rebecca looked at the purple notebook. Her face froze. What is that? Her personal journal. There's an entry about the night she saved Nathan Cole. He opened to the right page, held it out to her. Read it. Rebecca didn't take the journal. Her eyes narrowed. Where did you get this? From her desk. Nathan Cole wrote me a letter, told me where to look. And you believed him? Rebecca's voice rose. You broke into a police-sealed apartment based on the words of a murderer? Rebecca, listen. No. She jumped up from the sofa. You brought this filth into my home? Where are my children? Marcus stood, trying to remain calm. This isn't filth. This is truth. Mom wrote about what really happened, about her brother, about the pact with Nathan. I don't want to hear this. But you have to. The system won't use this at trial. Lawrence refused. He said the truth is too complicated, that... Truth? Rebecca laughed, sharp, hysterical. You call this truth? This is manipulation. Nathan Cole is a psychopath. He wrote you a letter, planted a fake journal, and you... This isn't a forgery. Look at the handwriting. This is her. I don't care. She stepped toward him. You're betraying her memory. You're destroying everything she built. Rebecca reached for the journal. This needs to be destroyed, burned, erased. I won't let you defile her name with this filth. She tried to wrench the journal from Marcus's hands. He instinctively pulled back. An awkward, furious struggle began. They shoved each other. Rebecca scratched his wrist with her nails, trying to take the purple notebook. Give it! No! Their bodies crashed into the coffee table. A silver frame with a photograph, Marcus, Rebecca, and Catherine on a carousel, happy, smiling, fell to the floor. Glass shattered. The sound was deafening in the sterile silence of the perfect house. They froze. Rebecca stared at the broken frame. Her breathing was rapid, uneven. Red blotches appeared on her cheeks. Get out, she whispered. Rebecca. Get out! Her voice broke into a scream. Get out of my house! And don't you dare come back here with this lie! She pointed at the door with a trembling hand. You're not my brother anymore. Not while you betray her. Marcus slowly stood, picked up the journal from the floor, looked at his sister. In her brown eyes, exact copies of their mother's eyes, he saw not love, not understanding, only cold hatred. He left. The door slammed behind him with a dull thud. Marcus stood on the porch of the perfect house in the perfect suburb. Alone. Completely, absolutely alone. The system had rejected him. Family had expelled him. He had no allies left. The trial began on a cold November morning. Marcus sat alone on a wooden bench in the courtroom. Around him gathered a crowd, journalists, curious onlookers, anti-violence activists. The first row was filled with people he recognized. His mother's colleagues from the library, neighbors, former students. Rebecca sat with her husband in the first row, left of the aisle. She didn't turn around, demonstratively ignored his existence. The courtroom was old, saturated with the smell of century-old dust and human fear. Benches of dark oak polished by thousands of nervous hands. Above the judge's seat hung a coat of arms, covered with cracks. Marcus held the purple journal in the briefcase on his lap. The last weapon. Despite Lawrence's refusal, despite Rebecca's expulsion, an irrational hope flickered in him. Maybe the prosecutor was bluffing. Maybe he'd use the journal his own way at the last moment when it would be most effective. Maybe the system would find a path to truth. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The state versus Nathan Leo Cole is now in session. Charge of first-degree murder. Nathan Cole was led into the courtroom. Thin, pale, in prison garb. Light gray eyes looked nowhere, face absolutely calm. Marcus looked at his mother's killer and felt no hatred, only strange, painful curiosity. The judge nodded to the prosecutor. Mr. Lawrence, your opening statement. Daniel Lawrence stood, massive, imposing, in a perfectly tailored navy suit. He walked around the prosecution table, stood before the jury. Marcus leaned forward, gripping the edge of the bench. Lawrence began to speak, and the very first words shattered Marcus's last hope into fragments. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor's voice boomed through the courtroom. This story begins with an angel. Pause for effect. Catherine Hayes wasn't just a librarian. She was an unwavering beacon of hope for lost souls in our town. For 40 years, she served the students of Riverside University, not just helping them find books, but helping them find themselves. Lawrence walked along the jury barrier. When others turned away from those on the edge, Catherine reached out her hand. When others judged, she empathized. When others said hopeless, she said possible. He turned, pointed to Catherine's photograph on the prosecution stand, that same one with library shelves in the background, warm smile, honey-colored eyes. In October 2016, she saved the defendant's life. Literally. Nathan Cole stood on the edge of a roof, ready to jump, and Catherine Hayes talked to him for 3 hours. In the rain. In the cold. Without support. Without help. Just her and a desperate young man. Lawrence paused, letting the words echo. She convinced him to live. She gave him hope. She gave him a future. The prosecutor's voice became quieter, but thereby more weighty. And 10 years later, Nathan Cole entered her apartment and stabbed her in the heart, 17 times. Someone on the jury flinched. The woman who saved his life died on the floor of her own living room, choking on blood. And her killer calmly walked out, closing the door behind him. Lawrence turned to Nathan Cole, pointed at him. There he sits, a heartless monster who repaid mercy with a stab to the heart, who turned an act of highest compassion into his death sentence. Marcus listened, and the world around him crumbled. Lawrence wasn't just ignoring the journal. He was building the most bombastic, most false, most effective story imaginable. Saint and monster, light and darkness, good and evil. Simple, understandable, absolutely false. Daniel Lawrence, his potential ally, the prosecution, had become his main antagonist, the architect of the biggest lie. Marcus gripped the briefcase with the journal. He was trapped. Marcus sat alone. The courtroom hummed with muffled conversations, rustling of clothes, coughing. Hundreds of people filled every bench, every inch of space. Journalists, curious onlookers, activists, his mother's students. But Marcus sat alone. He occupied an entire bench in the third row. People instinctively avoided sitting next to him, the victim's son, but betrayer of her memory. Pariah. Outcast. In the first row sat Rebecca with her husband. Straight back, perfect styling, cashmere blazer. She never turned around. Demonstratively, publicly ignored his existence. Marcus looked at the back of her head and felt the weight of his defeat. He'd failed on all fronts. The system rejected him. Family expelled him. The truth he'd found turned out to be wanted by no one. The purple journal lay in the briefcase at his feet. Useless weapon. Unused evidence. The judge, elderly man with stern face and gray eyebrows, banged his gavel, calling for order. "The hearing continues. Mr. Lawrence, your statement." Daniel Lawrence stood. Marcus watched the prosecutor and saw a man in his element. Massive figure in perfectly tailored navy suit, confident movements, cold gray eyes scanning the jury. Lawrence walked around the prosecution table, stood before the jury box. Pause. He owned silence like an instrument. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice deep, resonant. "The story I'll tell you today is a story about light and darkness." He walked along the barrier, slowly, every movement calculated. Catherine Hayes dedicated her life to serving others. 40 years. 40 years. She was not just a librarian. She was an unwavering beacon of hope for lost souls. Lawrence turned to the large display where Catherine's photograph was mounted. That same one, with library shelves in the background, warm smile, honey-colored eyes. Look at this face. Look at this woman. She didn't turn away from those on the edge. When others judged, she empathized. When others said hopeless, she said possible. The prosecutor's voice lowered, became more intimate. In October 2016, a young man stood on the edge of a dormitory roof, ready to jump, ready to end his life. And Catherine Hayes went up to him. Lawrence paused. The jury froze, absorbed. 3 hours. In the rain, in the cold, without support, without help. Just one woman and a desperate young man. She talked to him. She listened to him. She convinced him to live. The prosecutor turned, pointed at Nathan Cole. She gave him hope. She gave him a future. Marcus watched the jury, saw how they were completely absorbed by the story. A woman in the third row wiped away a tear. A man with a stern face shook his head, looking at Nathan with disgust. Daniel Lawrence was building a perfect emotional construction, and it worked flawlessly. And 10 years later, Lawrence's voice became harder. This man entered her apartment. Her home. The place where she should have been safe. Pause. And stabbed her in the heart. 17 times. Someone on the jury flinched. Catherine Hayes died on the floor of her own living room, choking on blood, and her killer, the man whose life she saved, calmly walked out, closing the door behind him. Lawrence slowly walked around the defense table, stopped directly in front of Nathan Cole. There he sits, a heartless monster who repaid mercy with a stab to the heart. Nathan didn't move. His pale face remained absolutely calm. Light gray eyes looked nowhere. Marcus observed this scene and felt the prosecutor's words crashing down on him like physical blows. Each phrase, a brick in the wall of beautiful, impregnable lies. The lie was winning not because it was stronger than truth. It was winning because it was a much better story. Marcus lowered his head. He'd done everything he could, found the truth, tried to convey it to the system, to family. Failed on all fronts. He looked at his hands folded on his lap, an architect's hands. Hands accustomed to building on solid foundations. But what's the point of building when no one wants to live in a house built on truth? Daniel Lawrence was approaching the finale of his speech. He returned to the jury, lowered his voice to a dramatic whisper. Catherine Hayes extended her hand to this man to pull him from the abyss. Pause. Perfectly calculated. And he repaid her by pushing her into that abyss herself. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "Your verdict," Lawrence said, looking each juror in the eye, "is not just a sentence. It's an answer to the question, what do we, as a society, do with those who trample goodness underfoot?" He made a final pause. "I ask you to return a guilty verdict, on all counts, because justice demands no less." Lawrence nodded and returned to his seat. There was no applause, this was court, but the atmosphere in the room spoke of the prosecution's complete victory. Marcus sat motionless, crushed, destroyed. He looked at Nathan Cole. For the first time, truly looked. Not as a monster, not as his mother's killer. He saw a man crushed by a lie. The lie that Catherine Hayes created on the roof 10 years ago. The lie that Daniel Lawrence was now immortalizing in this courtroom. And suddenly, something clicked in Marcus's head. He was an architect. His job was to see structural defects. This entire story, built by the prosecutor, a beautiful facade hiding a rotten foundation. His duty wasn't to try to convince the builders. His duty was to arrange a controlled demolition. He had one last weapon left, a tool no one could take from him, his own voice. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrison, is the defense ready for opening statement?" Nathan's attorney, an elderly man in a rumpled suit, began to stand, and Marcus rose sharply. The creak of the old wooden bench sounded in the courtroom's silence like a gunshot. All heads turned to him. The judge frowned. Daniel Lawrence looked with icy irritation. Rebecca turned, her face twisted with horror. Marcus stood, holding the briefcase in his hands. His heart beat with frantic rhythm, but his voice came out level. "Your Honor, I have something to say." Explosion of whispers through the room. "Mr. Hayes," the judge's voice was cold. "Sit down, immediately." "Your Honor, I'm the victim's son. I have information the court needs to hear." Daniel Lawrence jumped up. "Your Honor, this is inadmissible. Mr. Hayes is not—" "I'm not an attorney," Marcus interrupted, now addressing not the judge but the jury. "I'm an ordinary person, Catherine Hayes' son. And what you just heard from the prosecution, it's a story. A beautiful story." The judge pounded his gavel. "Mr. Hayes, one more word and I—" "But it's not the truth!" Marcus's voice rang louder, echoing off the high ceilings. He opened the briefcase, pulled out a photocopy of the journal page. "My mother was a complex, suffering human being, and what happened on that roof 10 years ago wasn't rescue." Marcus raised the sheet. "It was an act of desperation." Guards moved toward him. The judge shouted about order. Daniel Lawrence demanded they stop this outrage immediately, but Marcus began to read. Loudly, clearly, every word. I quote from the personal journal of Catherine Hayes, entry dated October 14th, 2016. His voice strengthened. Nothing worked. My words were empty to him. I saw in his eyes the absolute calm of someone who'd made a decision. And then I remembered Thomas, my brother. I remembered standing at his closed casket. The silence in the room changed. This was no longer silence of reverence. This was silence of shock. I told Nathan something I'd never told anyone. I told him about Thomas, about his suicide, about my guilt. And I told him that if he jumped, he wouldn't kill only himself. He would kill me, too. Marcus read slowly, letting each word sink in. That his death would weigh on my conscience as Thomas's death weighs. That I wouldn't survive it a second time. That we were now connected. That we had a pact. He had to live, because without that, I would die. Somewhere in the courtroom, a woman gasped. This was emotional blackmail, manipulation. I transferred the weight of my guilt onto his shoulders, forced him to carry my burden. Marcus lowered the sheet, looked at the jury. But it worked. He stepped back from the edge. I saved his life. Or did I sentence him to a life he didn't want to live? The last phrase hung in the air. Marcus slowly folded the sheet, put it back in his briefcase. These are my mother's words, her own words, written in her own hand. He looked at Daniel Lawrence. She wasn't an angel. She was a human being, a broken, suffering, desperate human being who made a mistake. Marcus's voice trembled, but he continued. And Nathan Cole lived 10 years carrying someone else's guilt on his shoulders, someone else's pain. 10 years in a prison my mother built for him out of love for a dead brother. He turned to Nathan Cole. For the first time during the entire trial, the killer's impassive mask wavered. Nathan slowly raised his head, looked directly at Marcus. In his light gray, almost colorless eyes, for a fraction of a second, something like recognition flickered. Not gratitude, not relief. Recognition that he was finally understood. The courtroom exploded. The judge pounded his gavel, shouted about order. Reporters jumped from their seats, reached toward Marcus. Rebecca covered her face with her hands. Daniel Lawrence was furiously saying something to the judge. Guards grabbed Marcus by the arms, began escorting him from the courtroom. He didn't resist. He'd done what he had to do. An architect who'd built his entire life on the principle of structural integrity had demolished the rotten foundation of lies. Even if it meant destroying the myth of his own mother. Even if it meant severing the last ties with family. Even if it meant public self-destruction. For the first time in many days, Marcus felt light. His internal struggle was over. He'd sacrificed myth, family, reputation, but he remained true to the only thing he had left, the solid foundation of truth. Cold November air hit Marcus in the face when guards led him out of the courthouse. He was immediately surrounded by a dense crowd of reporters, microphones, cameras, flashes. "Mr. Hayes! Mr. Hayes! Why did you do this? Do you understand you just destroyed your own mother's memory? Why did you speak against the prosecution?" A young journalist pushed forward, shoved the microphone in his face. "Mr. Hayes, why did you do this? Why did you speak against your own mother?" Marcus stopped, looked at her with unseeing eyes. The city around him continued to live. Cars drove down streets. People hurried about their business. The world hadn't changed from what he'd done. But he had changed. Brief pause. "I simply," he said in a quiet but firm voice, "cleared the site for new construction." Having said this, he silently walked through the crowd, alone, free, standing finally on solid ground.